They are fierce.
There's always a chance.
Check, check.
Usually I get called out when I'm not this time. So if we're not up here, we will be forced to sit there anyway.
I think we're going to get going. Okay, I think we're ready to go. So let's go. So my name is Kevin Platt. I'm from the Slavic department and from comparative literature. And this is a reading in the Writers Without Borders series at Kelly Writers House. And I should start by thanking Penn alumnus Seth Ginns, who is the sponsor of the Writers Without Borders series. He's not here, but we thank him. I was also asked to put in a plug here at the very beginning for Lisa Fishman, who's going to be reading a little bit later at Temple's Center City campus. She'll start at 8 p.m. That's at 1515 Market Street in room 222. So the other thing I should say is that after the reading, we will have a splendid reception with all kinds of goodies, which I've already seen in preparation. So please stick around and hobnob and consume. And also, I should say that there are books for sale in the foyer by Ayla, the bookseller. Okay, so let me start by introducing the first of our poets who's going to read tonight. And sort of preparing this introduction, the words which came to me were dizzying activity at the start. Dizzying activity, I think, describes very well both of the poets we're going to read tonight, both of whom are really multiple hat people, scholar, translator, poet, literary person about town types. Who do all kinds of things. Our first poet is Matvei Yankelevich. Matvei is a founding member of the editorial collective of Ugly Duckling Presse in New York City. Matvei is also the editor at Ugly Duckling of the Eastern European Poets series. And he's a co-editor of the journal 6x6. Matvei Yankelevich's recent books include Alpha Donut, which came out with United Artists, and Boris by the Sea with Octopus. His translations from the Russian have appeared in Calc, Circumference, Harpers, New American Writing, Poetry, and The New Yorker, and in some anthologies, including OBERIU, an anthology of Russian absurdism that came out from Northwestern. We also, our second poet is the editor and lead translator of the collective that put out that wonderful collection. Matvei's translations of Daniel Harms, one of the OBERIU group poets, were collected in Today I Wrote Nothing, the selected writings of Daniel Harms from Artis. And they were widely praised by TLS, by The Guardian, The New York Times, and many other places. Matvei edited also a portfolio of contemporary Russian poetry and poetics for the magazine Aufgabe, and he's written essays on conceptual writing in the LA Review of Books and on Russian American poetry. He teaches at Columbia University School of the Arts in their writing division and at the Milton Avery Graduate School of the Arts at Bard College. So please join me in welcoming Matvei Yankelevich.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you all. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to read with Eugene. And I'm going to read an excerpt from a long poem. Can you hear me okay? I'm going to read an excerpt from a long poem called Composition Book, and then I'm going to shuffle between three books, one of which is a translation. Today I Wrote Nothing, the Daniel Harms translation. So when you hear some strange Russian names, that's probably going to be from Harms. In other ways, you might know that it's not my writing. And then I'll also read from Boris by the Sea and this new collection, Alpha Donut. And hopefully it will not make sense in some interesting way. So I'll start with an excerpt. It's a very, very long poem, and I'll sort of do just a little from the middle somewhere. It would seem that there are piles of stuff everywhere, piles of brick and wood, piles of sand, piles of gravel, of stone, piles of grass, and piles of glass, of ice, and piles of dirt, piles of earth and soil, loam, manure, piles of water, of boats, of bodies we say corpses, of piles of earth, copses, heaps and hummocks. It's not what you would have wanted. Heightened, distant mountains scaled. Below, I don't really mean mountains. The piles in the distance move slower than the piles near at hand as seen from the point of view of the arrow. I confess to loving the distance as a view from the current location, rolling bogs, meadows, lands, rivers, forests, in short, the view from here, i.e. wherever, a point of view. I'd like to see how I'd be held dead, how you would comfort my body, but the poem, should it be a comfort, I confess it would put me to shameful sleep, bore me to wrath, and still there is something to it. To this, a word casts a shadow in another word, a line, others. Yet this infinity is not endless, not to speak of it. I'm bothered by my consciousness, limited, causing me to weep, cause me to moan, as it were, in the pines. Ut pictura poesis, the imitation of weeping and moaning, can induce the same if we are scammed by imitation into believing it is really the thing itself. Then, knowing its artifice, what do we mean saying it is true? We believe that things that are not are, though they are not, but just made to look it. Is the Bumble Bee real or the flower? Are both painted on? Imitation thus relies on a fallacy or a paradox. I'm sure these aren't the same. There's nothing identical, technically speaking, and yet so much is the same. The bee is fooled by artifice, and so are we. When I believe in it, the world disappears. I am breathtaken by cleverness and propriety, invention and strength, art's heroic sham. But I have nothing to conceal. Somehow it's almost equivalent to having no content to divulge, no story to tell, save the ones told again and again in ways and ways. So I search for things as they are in other words, or rather at a loss for words. At last, alas, oh, quit making me emote, making me bear my innermost feelings, which resemble everyone else's innermost feelings, though not exactly. Somewhere real guts are spilling, brains exiting heads, wholeness is being shattered as I sit here, dreadful somewhere, gratefully elsewhere. Yet though my brains are yet in my head, behind the skull that is meant to contain them, I lack guts for words, my words, aimless, depleted by reference, do not point the way, having lost the trail. I'm not being dramatic. I'm not being mimetic. I don't want pity. I'd like you to stop listening to me, fade away, take a stand or make a book or change a shirt, hike a path, drink a drink, track a trail or a track, go on. White wine is not white at all. So many are dead, and yet I think of them as if they lived. I don't want to be an elegy. I don't want to be a bee, nor an eagle viewing the peaks. I don't want to be composing. I don't want to be a composition book. I don't want you to call me anything. I should really update my curriculum vitae. Tiny letters turn the reader into a spectator, a view through. You mean this chicken scratch may be a window on the world? Words have been known to impregnate virgins and give life to clay, but words and chicken scratch are not identical. My father would not believe this exemplar to be good writing and would have been right. As he is no longer speaking, we don't have to heed his words nor mark them. As usual, too many disparate themes combine here without cohering. Nothing sticks, climb without ascending, none dressed in crimson, no one holding a book in one hand and a scepter in the other. If the image doesn't hold the thing, shall the word hold the image? Shot through with holes, I guess. The line is the line, not in the sense of identity, but in the sense of nothing more or goes without saying. The disaster's dawning on me. What is a thing? Is the thing here? It's neither here nor there, the same record, just the other side, to move between texture, conceptual objects, and everyday things, to move fluidly, modernly, the ring of the phone gliding all interruption folded into the flow, the text that's become a message only. It's not possible to write adequate to the situation, but is it possible to write totally inadequate to the situation, to write while staring into so-called space? A tool of mass propaganda may make you feel like part of the community. What's the upshot? I have a grand theory, but it is yet to be proven. Will it be proven? No, it will not be proven. Stop there. Eugene promised that he would drink some wine during the reading. This is the moment. Sinfonia number 2. Anton Mikhailovich spat and said ech, spat again and said ech, spat again, said ech again, and left. God bless. I'd better tell you about Ilya Pavlovich. Ilya Pavlovich was born in 1893 in Constantinople. When he was still a little boy, he was taken to Petersburg, and that's where he went to the German school on Kirichnaya Street. After that, he worked at some kind of store, went on to do something else, and at the start of the revolution, he moved abroad. And God bless him. I'd better tell you about Anna Ignatievna, but it's not that easy to tell you about Anna Ignatievna. First of all, I know nothing about her, and second of all, I fell off my chair just now and forgot what I was going to tell you about. Better, I'll tell you about myself. I'm tall, rather bright, and dress elegantly and with considerable taste. I don't drink, don't attend the races, but I am drawn to the ladies, and the ladies don't try to shirk me. They even like it when I stroll with them. Serafima Ismailovna has invited me over many a time, and Zinaida Yakovlevna also said that she's always glad to see me. But with Marina Petrovna, I had a curious incident, which is what I want to tell you about. The incident was really quite typical, but still curious. For thanks to me, Marina Petrovna went completely bald, like the palm of your hand. It happened like this. One day I came over to see Marina Petrovna, and bang, she went bald, and that's all. This is in a very different tone. Since translation is something I do kind of parallel to writing, and particularly Harms is always part of what I'm sort of thinking about when I think about most things, because I've been translating him for like 20 years, which is scary to think of, but I kind of thought, well, why not just put him in the mix of what I do? This is obviously from Boris by the Sea. Boris took the chair apart. He made the parts into a pile. He lit a match. As the parts were wooden, they began to burn. Boris threw the matches in too. They were also wooden and also began to burn. He watched and watched as the parts burned and burned. He was satisfied just to watch. The chair seemed also strangely satisfied, as though it had finally fulfilled its true purpose. And Boris had helped it to do so. And when it was finished, there was a charred black hole in the wooden floor where once a chair had stood, and Boris climbed into the hole. Poem, a rather traditional one, actually, in some ways. There's nothing but letters, so it must be winter. What do these girls look like inside their coats? They talk about Salinger's medicine cabinet. If you call me in the morning, don't call me Muffin. There are always sports, a sentence you keep on writing over and over. Let's keep moving over the period instead of stopping abruptly. A poem can be edited to be made betterer. The translation, however, is like an eclipse. You can see the thing emanating from the edges. You can't see the source so good, but the target is crystal. I forgot a line in a dream. Christmas trees piled on the corner sideways. A memory of flying over Mount Rainier. This book has a few epigraphs I invented. Where is it? So I'll read you one or two. All the good songs were written to kill us and take our stuff. Xerxes. I have no idea why that's funny, but it is. Every time I read it, it's funny. And actually, I feel like I stole it from someone, Bernadette Mayer or something, but I don't know why I feel that way. This is sort of another stolen epigraph. The thing I like most about your jacket is that it's not pants. Christian book. And that segues into one of the sentimental poems in this book. You walked past the bar. I thought I saw your jacket. Boy, was I upset. This is an MFA poem in that I have been told, though I don't have an MFA, that it's a good idea to have an epiphany in a poem. So I thought I would write one with several. Metonymy. You are part of something. Metaphor. You are something else. Hyperbole. More. Again. Some of you were in this class that Eugene and I sat in on, which seemed like a class I would want to take, except for the part where Eugene and I sat in. But otherwise, it seemed particularly productive. And I'll read a piece that that those people in that class have already read. Another redundancy. In the style of Harms. Events. One day, Orlov stuffed himself with mashed peas and died. Krylov, having heard the news, also died. And Spiridonov died regardless. And Spiridonov's wife fell from the cupboard and also died. And the Spiridonov children drowned in a pond. Spiridonov's grandmother took to the bottle and wandered the highways. And Mikhailov stopped combing his hair and came down with mange. And Kruglov sketched a lady holding a whip and went mad. And Perekhostov received 400 rubles wired over the telegraph and was so uppity about it that he was forced to leave his job. All good people, but they don't know how to hold their ground. There's a kind of an odd piece in here. We were talking about the number 6. I'll read this odd piece. It doesn't have a title. 1. We were lying in bed, she facing the wall on an incline, and I was lying by the bedside table. Only 2 words can be said about me. Big ears. She knew everything. 2. Is this a fork or an angel or 100 rubles? This is Nona. A fork is too small, an angel is too tall. The money ran out long ago. So Nona, she is she. She alone is Nona. There were 6 Nonas, and she is one of them. 3. A dog in a small hat came up. Footsteps sounded and splashed. A fly was throwing the windows open. Let's look out the window. 4. There's nothing to see out the window. Do you see anything? I don't see anything. Do you? I see skis. And who is on the skis? A soldier is on the skis, and he has a belt over his shoulder, though he's not wearing a belt. I think I'll read a couple more, and that'll be it. Okay. Boris wasn't sure where he was going. For a moment, he thought that he was in the middle of a sentence. The next minute, he found himself walking down an empty street. Just then, he was not trampled, barely, by a harnessed mare pulling along a crumbling carriage. Suddenly, Boris became very old, and wise, too. But then, as it happens some of the time with old and wise men, Boris fell over dead. At this point, the story comes to a point, and that point is too narrow for the story to pass through. And since this is the Kelly Writer's House, some of you might like poetry. This is for you. Only the red wheelbarrow has such small hands. It's a very sentimental collection. So, when I could hardly hear you on the phone, you said something very important. I'll never know what it was, but I will meet you under the bridge anyway. I have a feeling that no one really likes the poem I'm about to read. Maybe that's why I'm having trouble finding it. Oh, yeah. At least no one is putting hot nails into my body. No one is putting out their cigarettes against my skin. No one is raping me with or without condoms. No one is enslaving me, forcing me onto my knees, nor carving me up with tin cans, nor branding me with fired irons, nor fondling me with fireplace tongs, nor beating me with either poker, crowbar, or gun butt. No one has taken a hammer to me. No one is binding me with rope or barbed wire. No one is piercing me with knives, nor scarring me with broken glass. No one is holding me under water, nor spraying me with acid, nor burning me with flicked matches. No one is depriving me of light. No one is holding me against my will. At least no one is keeping me alive. Boris had an idea. Then he sat down and wept. It is hard to say what it was that Boris had been thinking about before he stopped thinking about it. He closed the window. How easy it is for a person to get tangled up in insignificant things. You can walk for hours from the table to the wardrobe and from the wardrobe to the couch and never find a way out. You can even forget where you are and shoot arrows into some small cabinet on the wall. "Beware, cabinet," you can yell at it. "I'll get you." Or you can lie down on the floor and examine the dust. There is inspiration in this too. It's best to do it on a schedule, in conformity with time. Although it's difficult to determine the time limit, for what are the time limits of dust? It's even better to gaze into a tub of water. To look at water is always good for you and edifying. Even if you can't see anything in it, it's still good. We looked at the water and saw nothing in it, and soon we got bored. But we comforted ourselves that still we had done a good deed. We counted on our fingers. But what were we counting? We didn't know. For is water in any way countable? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matvei. So our next poet tonight to read is going to be Eugene Ostashevsky. Eugene is a master teacher in the liberal studies program at New York University. I found no better introduction for him than a quote from his faculty page at NYU, which is, "My main interests lie in the intersection of poetry, philosophy of language, philosophy of math, epistemology, and translation. Unfortunately, such an intersection might not exist." He has published 3 books of poetry: Iterature, Enter Morris Imposternak, Pursued by Ironies, and The Life and Opinions of D.J. Spinoza with Ugly Duckling Presse. His work as a translator includes OBERIU, an anthology of Russian absurdism, which came out from Northwestern and which also included translations by Matvei. This is a selection of work of the OBERIU group. Eugene has also translated the works of contemporary Russian poet Dmitry Galinko. So please join me in welcoming Eugene.
Hey, thanks, Kevin, and it's always a pleasure to read with Matvei, and thank you very much, everybody, for coming. I actually want to try to do a couple of things that I've never done before. And the reason I haven't done this piece before is because I'm still working on it. It's a very short libretto for my friend Lucia Ronchetti, who's a composer. And she asked me to write a piece about this strange interaction between Paul Wittgenstein's older brother, who was a pianist, and he lost his arm in World War I. He had lots of money because he was a Wittgenstein, and he kept commissioning different composers to write concerto for left-handed piano. The most famous of these is the one he commissioned from Ravel. And Ravel went to hear him play it in Vienna in, I forget whether it's 32 or 33. But Paul Wittgenstein, he wanted to show that with one arm he could play as well as people can play with both arms. So he started putting all this stuff into the concerto that Ravel didn't put in there. So they had a big fight. And Ravel, possibly at this time he already had it, but he came down with basically a brain illness that he died from, which was some kind of aphasia. It's not really clear what kind. So the first it's a libretto in 3 pieces. The first piece is Paul. The second piece is Ravel, and the third piece is they're in dialogue. 1. Our revels are now open. Oh, and Harms is all over here. Our revels are now open. There once was a right-handed man who had no right arm. Was he a pianist? He was a poor pianist, ein armer Pianist. He lived in a concentration camp. Why? That's where people went to concentrate in the 20th century. There was a concentration of campers in the concentration camp. Had all of them lost their right arms? All of them had lost their right 2 arms. Only some had lost their right arms. Only others had lost their wrong arms. All of them had lost their equilibrium. One moment they were concentrated, the next all of them had let go. It was just like that. It was like the falling of leaves in the month that some parts of the empire call Listopad. It was like the game of Go. The game of Go has rules. They're followed blindly. Their loss had 2 pains, as it were, a right and a left. The right pain the pianist knew in his lost arm. The pianist knew his lost arm was not in pain. The pianist also knew the left pain. It was like music he could no longer play. Music has lures. They followed blindly. 2. Our revels are now open-ended. That is not right. I do not recognize my hand. Start over. There was a right-handed man who one time could not get his hand right. Was he a writer? He was a writer of notes. Was he translated? His notes had no need to be translated, for there was nothing wrong with him. The tones in his head left the notes in his hand. They called him a gatherer of notes, ein Komponist. He was composed. He had many beautiful sleeves until the day he did not rekag, start over. One day, one noted man took 8 days to compose one note. He could not read his hand. He had to appeal to the jurisdiction of the dictionary. He was together until he did not know his hand. How did he not know his hand? He did not know his hand like this. There was an articulate man who once could not remember his hand. He said, "Hello, are you my long daughters, Alexia, Apraxia, Agraphia, Acalculia, and what is your name, fair gentlewoman?" Start over. He could not start over. He could not start over. His notes fell. It was an emergency, ein Notfall. Our revels are now ended. First sentence Ravel, second sentence Paul Wittgenstein. And it is not at all like that. I am not following you. That is what I'm saying. I know what I'm doing. Know what I'm doing. I am an artist. Your art is to follow. I'm not following you. I know what I'm doing. Know what I'm doing. I am the artist. That's what I'm saying. I'm not following you. Your art is to follow. It's not at all like that. So I guess I should have indicated who's saying what. Okay, thanks. So I want to read a Vidyansky translation, which is it's a retranslation of something I did for the anthology, and I retranslated for a selected Vidyansky, which I'm editing, and that Matvei is also in, and that's coming out with New York Review of Books in April. The book is called An Invitation for Me to Think. And this is his last poem. It's called Elegy. And the epigraph is, I made an elegy with art of how I rode in a farm cart. Surveying the tops of mountains, their uncountable feet, wine-swollen vessels, the world like snow in splendor. I saw cold streams, the storm's fierce gaze, the wind high and serene, and death's fruitless hour. Here is a knight swimming like a cod, with lofty courage in his heart. Against the agitated main, he wages an unequal battle. Here a horse lays in its hands the blaze of wild deliverance, as twilight horses do a dance on the palm of the stately thistle. Where the forest looks into the fields, at night's inaudible decor, we look through the window with no blinds, at the glow of the soulless star, hide our hearts in empty doubt, wake, languish, whimper in the night. We mean almost nothing. We wait for an obedient life. We are estranged from admiration. We feel only perturbation. We cowardly betray a friend. The Lord is not our Lord. We cultivated the flower of grief. Ourselves to ourselves forgave. We who like ashes have grown cold prefer the carnation to an eagle. With envy I look at beasts. I trust neither thoughts nor words. Our minds have suffered a loss. There's no reason to struggle. We apprehend all as a fall, even the day, the dream, the shadow, and even the buzz of music won't escape the abyss. Neither the restlessness of the surf, nor deserted shifting sands, nor the obscene bodies of women sated our yearning. We forgot the pose of untroubled calm, sang death, sang dearth, sang lies, sang harm, equated remembrance with pretense. That's why we're burning. Divine birds fly, their fine braids flap, their bathrobes glint like knives, their flight lacks mercy. They measure off units of time. They test the weight and the strain. Ignore the empty stirrups clang. Don't plead insanity. Allow the crystal stream to roam, the mirror horse to trot on home, breathing in the musical air you breathe in rot. Driver irritable and ill at the final hour of sleepy dawn, rush, rush the lazy carriage with all you got. No swans above the festive boards flap the white pinions of their wings, together with bronze eagles trumpeting hoarsely. Eradicated inspiration now visits for almost no duration. Orient yourself by death, singer and poor horseman. It's from 1940. In lots of ways, it's his most classical piece. And and very much like the end of the era piece. I mean, if you want the end of the avant-garde, it's this poem, really. Okay. And I want to read a few pieces from a manuscript I've been working on for a long time, or rather not working on for a long time, called The Pirate Who Doesn't Know the Value of Pie. And it's about the relationship between a pirate and a parrot who get stranded on a deserted island. But the first piece I want to do is it's a very multi-voice, multi-language piece. It's not super easy. And it's got a bunch of Russian, but it's almost entirely in English, otherwise with some other stuff. And unlike all the other poems, it has a title, and it's Hidu the Abardash in different voices. And Abardash is, it's Russian from French, from English. It's what pirates do when they board a ship, right? Abardash. Oh, shall we go na abardash, captain, my captain? What? Excuse me? Where did you get that word? I got it from the Russian. It doesn't sound very Russian. Captain, this is no time for etymology. A Turkish dreadnought has lifted her hatches, and me four BIC in row upon row the mouths of homologous ordnance. Dreadnoughts don't have such hatches, boatsman. Who you gonna believe, your picture dictionary or my own eyes? Music from the distance. На абордаж, уже корабль, судно противника почти наш. Мы в раж войдем и заберемся на такелаж, и попрыгаем оттуда на вражеский экипаж. Счастлив, кто падает вниз головой, мир для него хоть и мир, но иной. Who's that singing so unnotingly in the crow's nest? Ebony mother, ahoy there in the crow's nest. What? I can't hear you. I'm in the crow's nest. You want cat of square root of 80 tails? Can't hear you. Cat 8.9442719. I'll never tell tales that way. Afraid not. So it has afraid not. Where can I get a new cat in the middle of the sea? Captain, the Turkish dreadnought is bearing down upon us. Boatsman, how can she be bearing down upon us if you just saw her portholes? I am not responsible for my language, sir. Ebony mother, who gave me this Jack Spicer for a boatsman? 'Twas the market, sir. Freedom of trade, you said. Freedom of trade. Pirates don't believe in union wages. So you hired me. I'm not in the boatsman's union. By training, I'm a parrot. I'm shocked that he's so selfish as to bring up wages at this time. Captain, the Turkish dreadnought is frantically signaling. Find out what they want. Captain, I don't speak Turkish except for invective. Ahoy there! Turbanli Ataturk! Michael Jackson is. We don't speak Turkish. But what about your flag? It used to be Russian, but we can't find the hammer. And the Armenians took the sickle handle. Ever since then, they called us Battleship Potemkin Village. Oh, half-power sickle! Oh, cowardly dreadnought! По морям, по волнам, дней спа, на завтра пропал. Exactly, where the common goyim. What meaning do they speak of, boatsman? None. They let their words get the best of them, sir. In that case, the inopposite punning of these pundits shall get no plaudits from this pirate, boatsman, for I am pooped of these language games. I want meaning. You read my thoughts like a book, sir. Dedificatione oracolorum, great pun is dead by Plut if you allow it, sir. And so, my pretty parrot, get the pirate ship ready for conflict. Ahoy! All hands on deck! Up, dogs! That's not what it means! Ebony mother! Nabardash! Don't fire until you see the signs of their whiteout! This is a collage poem in that I got almost all of it from the internet. And in fact, the second half is in its entirety, except for, I think, one word, a BBC interview with a Somali pirate. And the first half I put together from various statements. Ahoy there! I'm not trying to sell anything. Unless you want this inflatable rowboat, just joking. I'm a journalist. Being a journalist enlightens me, educates me, and humbles me. No matter how small the story or how large, it all counts. People are counting on me. My job is to tell the truth to the best of my ability, and I just love telling stories. With joy, I tell the stories that cry out to be heard, giving voice to the last, the least, and the latest, so that people may know, reach out, and act in the name of justice, peace, freedom, and compassion. And I want to interview you. See, you have an extraordinary story too. I want to know what makes you, you. I want to find out what your story is all about, what makes you smile and laugh, and what makes your heart ignite with passion. I want to share your story with the world. Now, why did you become a pirate? I don't know if you've spoken with people from developed nations before. Please open yourself up and don't let me put words into your mouth. My ambition is to get a lot of money so that I can lead a better life. Now I have 2 lorries, a luxury car, and have started my own business in town. I only want one more chance in piracy to increase my cash assets. Then I will get married and give up. Piracy is not just easy money. It has many risks and difficulties. Sometimes you spend months in the sea to hunt a ship and miss. Sometimes when we're going to hijack a ship, we face rough winds, and some of us get sick and some die. Sometimes you fail in capturing, and sometimes you come under threat by foreign navies, but all we do is venture. Our work is seen by many in the coastal villages as an act of resistance, and we're viewed as heroes. A lot of people in coastal villages aspire to be us. That's an actual Somali pirate speaking. Okay, I'm just going to read one more poem. Because I need to hear what some lines sound like. One day, the pirate and the parrot went to see their friend, a nudnik who became a jihadnik, as he energetically engaged in preparing eggplant salad with his whistling scimitar of Damascene steel while crouching outside the cave that constituted his secret location. Hola, hollered the parrot. Hola to you too, replied the nudnik who became a jihadnik. My friends, he then added, it is such a perfect pleasure to see you. You, parrot, put on 15 pounds. You, pirate, look puffy and pale. How can you be so unhale in this ambiance Indo-Iranic? Have some eggplant. It's rich in vitamins. It's 100% organic. The friends tasted the eggplant and pronounced it good. in all my adventures in nature, avowed the good-natured pirate. Whenever I took a break from plundering to set out hiking, or as more usual, swimming, or when with my tread betraying escalating excitement, I entered an eating establishment such as restaurant, cafeteria, taco stand, noodle shop, kiosk specializing in local specialties, or that global gobble, I've never, and I mean never, no, I ever, not ever tasted such enticing eggplant. It is as gentle as babies when they're barely born, and not detrimental like rabies infecting a mammal forlorn. Yes, it is tasty and zesty like the leaping of a grasshopper above a freshly plowed furrow. Yet it's not noisy and nasty like the weeping of a teeny bopper when she stands on the subway platform thinking about ending it all because something her friends did awoke the Dracula of her inner sorrow. No. It's more like that split second when the human pain of that young shopper, and more importantly, her resolution to throw herself under a train after Stephanie and Jenny, compared her to a small landlocked sockeye salmon called Kakani, because that sort of insensitivity is common to young people from the outlying borough, suddenly dissolves to the unheard strain of little orphan Annie singing tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. This eggplant, responded the nudnik who became a jihadnik because his therapist told him he kept too much on the inside neck, reminds me of the nightingale stuttering like musa above the enfolding that is the rose ruled over by the ratio phi. It's that good. Yet little does he know that his stutter putatively about phi denotes phi only to the arbitrarily large decimal point n, but at the n+1 this alleged phi deviates inconspicuously from true phi, alas. For the eater thereof will initially feel like Al-Ghazali studying algebra al fresco next to an alpaca in Albania, or alternately like Al-Farabi allegorizing his way out of an aporia asserted by Al-Razi over almonds and Alka-Seltzer in Albergo True Falsafa. That's the kind of eggplant it is. But he will not feel that way forever, for everything passes and this eggplant too shall pass. Friends, parrot, pirate, no, I have poisoned this eggplant. Yes, friends, I have poisoned this eggplant, but not like poison so that you'll fall down and expire. No, lightly and unmethodically, as if I were adding a seasoning like cumin or maybe cardamom sufficient for diarrhea, lasting perhaps a few hours or several days, not more. You might query wherefore I did it, whether my intentions were pedagogical, whether my tactics were psychological and gastroenterological, for memory responds to suffering much more than it respects the logical work. Not so, but it is ratiocination. I didn't intend any end. It was only so we three may jointly laugh at my lighthearted joke. Pirate, don't eat the eggplant, parrot. It's poisoned, parrot. Alack and well a day. Diarrhea, here I come. Thanks, and now the reception. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we going to have a Q&A? Or
Sure.
I'm sure the audience might have a couple of questions. Is that a good idea? Is that how we usually do this?
Actually, that's what Jessica said.
Yes, we are going to have a Q&A for just a couple of minutes. So why don't you both go ahead? Is it? It's part of the deal. All right. So why don't you guys moderate?
We'll moderate. Thank you.
Oh, I didn't do this.
So please, questions to the poet, translator, scholars.
It's what the Somali pirates would want.
What?
It's what the Somali pirates would want.
But it's really amazing that Somali pirate speech, I literally changed one word. That's all I did. I just thought it was so interesting that as a statement maybe on translation, but also on the mentality that it's done in the language of venture capitalism periodically, you know? I mean, it's, and, you know, this and the trucks, and then, you know, the stuff with, and then I will get married and give up, you know, this one more, it's so interesting. But, yeah.
I work in an office and I've never studied literature, so I apologize if this is a ridiculous question. But when I was telling some office mates where I was going tonight, I said I'm going to see two translators of Daniel, I know it's pronounced Harms. And I described him as the greatest Russian writer of the 20th century no one knows
Yes.
about, or very few people. Like, true or false? Please comment.
Oh.
Actually, maybe even like
True.
not enough- Oh, good. Okay.
I mean, for me, yeah. Actually, I think Harms is a kind of a strange linchpin figure in the history of Russian writing and of the 20th century, and is very much, as we were talking earlier, connected to 19th century. I mean, he's really developing a lot of Dostoevsky in certain pieces, right? And I don't know. I think he kind of prefigures a lot of what happens in later Soviet writing, late Soviet writing, and maybe even in Sorokin and people like that too. So postmodern writers. So for me, he's a crucial figure, but that's perhaps just because I've spent so much time with him. Because he's so outside what's going on in his time in certain ways, and yet also picking up on what's going on, he's able to be less contextually bound, strangely, at the same time as he obviously is contextually bound, but there's something there that comes out in Harms that that is productive for other contexts as well, not just the Soviet Union of the 30s, but any context, like our context now with all of the violence and disappearances on the Mexican border, or, to say that it's only the Soviet Union in the 30s that is so brutal is kind of myopic, right? We're living in such a brutal age that Harms's perspective on violence is somehow quite applicable, right?
But I also, well,
But Vidensky is actually better. Don't mean to put words in your mouth.
As far as the greatest 20th century Russian writer that nobody's ever heard of, I mean, Platonov also fits that category. Platonov has like almost no coverage in the States. Platonov is really, really major. And, his main novel, I mean, he doesn't translate because it's these completely insane. There's several translations of The Foundation Pit, and one can argue, about Chandler versus Ginsberg, blah, 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 blah. But, and this is something that I think I respect most of all, he makes up his own language. I mean, it's almost literally like his own, it's unmistakable. And his really big novel, Chivengur, there's no English version of it. And I mean, that's,
Sadly.
yeah, in lots of ways, that's the real epic of the 20th century.
Yeah, as far as epics go, what I like about Harms is that doesn't fit the modernist mold, and that it's not any great work of literature. It's all miniatures or fragments or some kind of weird concatenation of fragments that forms this marginal kind of body of work. It's hard to even call it a body, really, and which is why, for me, it seems really interesting now, at the end of literature or something like that. Though I think that Zhenya is right as far as novels go, modernism, especially. I mean, as a kind of like late modernism, Platonov is someone to look into. I think you would enjoy him, and the way he plays with the language of ideology is really fascinating too.
Yeah.
Maybe this was covered partly by Kevin's introduction, or maybe it's a completely idiotic question, but I wonder whether you could tell us a little bit more about your life as writers. Where do you read your poetry? Which other writers do you hang out with? do you address? Do you address Russian audiences?
I don't think the Russian audience wants us to address them.
I don't think that's really true.
Not always, no, but I don't know that's, it's a strange audience for us, but maybe a solely English-speaking language audience is also a strange audience for us in some ways, in different ways.
yeah. I think I don't know, I'm often asked about my audience because I make puns in different languages. And I'm like, well, some people get this and some people get that. I think, I don't know, I think in New York especially, there's this just flood of people who live between languages that the work is for. I don't think it works so well as mainstream American poetry because just the assumptions are different and like what one wants is different, and I think the audience is also different. But the issue is trying to gather these people. And I mean, Matvei has been doing an amazing job with Ugly Duckling Presse. But in some ways it's becoming a big, small press. I mean, compared to what it was. And even the audience of that press, I don't think there's a single Ugly Duckling audience. There's many different audiences. So, yeah. But our life as writers, yeah,
I really recommend it.
Yeah, I don't think I have a writer's life anymore.
Yeah.
I have a kid, so.
I'm
a
the
lot.
press.
Yeah.
So going off of that last question, and thank you both so much for that. I wonder if you could speak a bit more about the relationship between your scholarly work and your translation and your status as practitioners, specifically being scholars like OBERIU, the last avant-garde, the moment where compositional strategy and any kind of discernible aim, political or otherwise, becomes incredibly obfuscated. How do you operate from that space, and how does that space inform?
Well, I think one of the, Matvei has already said, this is something that I also deeply believe when people ask, well, why are you interested in the OBERIU? In some ways, their end of literature shtick, which was deeply felt, it really wasn't a shtick in lots of ways, resonates with us, even though the conditions are completely different. It makes sense to us in a way that maybe more traditional literature doesn't. I mean, it's not like I want to sit around here and say literature is, dead. But, it's poetry especially, it's changing. The rules are changing. And, the way things are changed, I think it was Max Planck who said that theories don't convince anybody, it's just people who believed in the old ones die out. It's the same thing, when ideas change in literature, practices change, the people become obsolete. I think that's something that Stalin understood very well. Yeah, it's like you can't change the people. So in some ways, I certainly feel obsolete in lots of ways. Because I've been having these funny conversations with my students because a student came into my office a few days ago, and she's doing a presentation on modern times, and she was like, well, I want to do the political of modern times, and I was like, okay, well, what was going on in the 30s? And then she didn't know, and then I started asking younger people, and not a single person can give me an answer. And I think that's astonishing. And it's not that, there's no, and that's what makes me feel like a dinosaur, And it's not that they don't know, but it's a very different historical consciousness, or maybe it's just not historical. And my consciousness is very historical, and my work is very historical.
Yeah, but maybe if you said, well, that's when Hitler was amassing power.
No, but I
And
said,
then the person would be like, yeah, of course. Or, and what that means is that actually that Hitler is amassing power all the time, not just in the 30s. It's like a consciousness of where it's not really attached to historical, like
Right.
it's an internet consciousness or
yeah,
something, right? Possibly.
right.
But so that it's not like the younger person is not aware, it's just a different way of thinking about.
But what's
They
curious,
probably don't know. They probably aren't aware.
well,
Well, when Chaplin has the Dictator, for instance, or something like that, then I mean, if you liked that movie, you probably would like it because you knew something, right? Or I don't know, but
yeah. But what's funny is that if you
That's
if you
off.
bring in one thing,
yeah.
for us, if we forget something and you bring in one thing, then we can think it immediately brings in associations with contemporaries, and that's not the case.
Oh yeah.
I mean, things feel differently to people born in a different century
Right.
from that occurs, and that's
Right,
about
right.
to happen. Is that
Right,
people
right,
were
right.
born in the 21st century.
So in some ways, what's weird is that I find that I'm writing, like this piece. The idea wasn't mine. Like Lucia commissioned me, but I'm writing more and more about, stuff having to do with my grandparents and great grandparents, right? And it was really curious because the same days I talked to my student, I was having lunch with Paulina. And it's just like, well, what do we talk about at lunch? We talk about the Siege of Leningrad. Like lunchtime conversation. And only like that evening did I realize how that's just bizarre. It doesn't really coincide.
I think it's actually really interesting because I think that our generation is now getting, and I think there's a little zeitgeist of our generation getting interested in the period after the avant-garde, whereas maybe just before us people were interested in the avant-garde, and then what will happen is like a recuperation of the 50s and then a recuperation of the 60s and different kind of recuperative kind of echoes that make sense to people. Like people a little younger maybe like want to research everything about Spicer or something, but like for us it's part, especially in Russia right now, it's what happened after the OBERIU in the 40s and who were the poets that kind of knew the OBERIU and what Polina is working on, and what about the Siege of Leningrad, what was that like, for writers and artists and people, and like how is that documented, how did that emerge in writing, whereas before it was like something nobody talked about really. And it is, you're right, like a fade, but we are, we're going to fade into, like our interest zone is going to become obsolete as well at some point. Once it's like once it's OBERIU stuff and maybe the 40s and stuff are kind of given a different look, then it'll be like old hat. Right? But I'm not sure that answers any of your question. I mean, my part of it doesn't answer your question, but
What was the question?
scholarship, translation, and obfuscation of the political was interesting.
That was only just a
Just
small
in
part of it,
terms
but
of OBERIU,
when there's this uncertainty about how to proceed,
how to
dating so many
proceed.
decades back, how do you two proceed from within that very
Well,
difficult space that you're stuck in?
I would just say that like my work as a translator, which is sort of like a kind of dilettantish scholarship basically, which I'm okay with, but it's like, okay, I uncover what I kind of think I need to know, but some things I approximate and in order to do the translation, but then all of that stuff becomes food for writing, but not really like for writing so much, but for thinking about strategies to go against what I'm seeing as the overarching kind of ideological narrative of my time, and so I'm looking at OBERIU and other stuff and seeing how it's possible to move against certain things that are taken as given, or in my literary culture, also like my small world literary culture, and the larger literary culture as well.
Even though there's no mapping. I mean, you can't map one on the other. They're not isomorphic, but they're still kind of weird, vague parallels, analogies that you sometimes I mean, a very obvious one, right? Living under Stalinism. And again, I'm not suggesting that this is the same, but it has an angle from which it seems the same. As one of the essential problems of OBERIU, especially the work in the late 30s, right, is that the language has just suffered this complete inflation, right? Words have become meaningless because of the government, because of the media, because blah, 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 because of the linguistic nature of Stalinism. So in works like Patiets that we talked about, in class today, I mean, why is there this fixed attention to this made-up word? I mean, in part, it's because the basic problem that Vedensky is working with is, you know, how do I write poetry when poetry is dead? How do I do poetry when language is false? Right? I mean, language is compromised, language is false. Now, you know, language, you know, our American English is not compromised in the same way. It's not compromised in the same extent, if quantification makes any sense here, which I don't think it does. But it is compromised, right? It's compromised by different structures, right? But in some way, in some way, the question of, you know, how do I write poetry when, you know, this language is, you know, tawdry, cheap, commercial, blah, 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 it's the same question, right? But then maybe it was always the same question, because if you look at Flaubert, that's, you know, that's the question, except it's prose.
Maybe just to follow on that, I'm very interested in maybe to shift the conversation a little bit. It seems like one answer that you two have come to comes from translation in some sense. And I love the tension when you two read together. It's like the Janus-based schizophrenia translation, right? Like Matvei on one hand is like methodical and precise, you know, this very cool precision that then unravels or twists, you know, at some point. And then you have the Eugene, the kind of like excessive, ecstatic wildness of language in translation and the uncontrollableness that, you know, falls through all these puns. I'm really interested in seeing those two pieces together, and particularly compelled by your comments about writing as you're translating, and that being a kind of mode of accessing language, because it really does seem to have like a magic potential that has created these works, you know, in a space that's very difficult maybe to write creatively in our small world of poetry. You know, it's hard to write creatively in a kind of gray area. So I'm interested in how you see that coming out of translation, or if you do.
How would I see which thing coming out of translation? This particular, like a particular kind of writing, or
Right. Well, how maybe the stylistics of translation offers a mode for contemporary composition, right?
Well, translation is, I mean, in a sense, when you're translating, no matter what, you're dealing with constraint. Even if you're not translating an Olympian text, you're dealing with the constraints of that language, of what's going on in that particular line, what is the pun, or what is the sound, or what is the end rhyme, or whatever it might be, or the syntax, the diction, the level of the line. So there's so many constraints to think about, and then the more you're experiencing language as a constraint, the more it becomes obvious that is how we're, you know, what we write from, rather than from some kind of like font.
Right,
you know?
right.
We're writing from these constraints, and from constraints of, as Eugene said very eloquently, the language of our culture, particularly, and also the macaronic language of the current world, right? But so I think that somewhere in there is maybe an answer, or just, you know, kind of a beginning of an answer.
I mean, I think also, well, you know, with the way that I write, and I think with the way that both of us write, actually, in some ways there's a similar dynamic in translation and writing, and that there's always the outsidedness of language, right? That you're always kind of looking at, in translation, when you're working with the original, and you're looking at not just the meanings, but the forms, and how it's possible to replicate these forms, and of course it's not possible to replicate the forms or the meaning, right? Well, you know, it's the same thing with poetry when, at least with the way that I write, with the way that we write is, you know, you're not just using words, you're using words and then the usage is always reflexive, right? I mean, you're looking at yourself using the word, and that's how you get to the next word, right? So it's similar transition in that sense.
We could have one more question and then continue the
And
discussion.
then recept.
There was a question here. No, there wasn't.
It's covered.
Can I ask a question? I wanted to ask a question about writing with personae. And is this the first time you're using such historical figures as the? Because
in the Wittgenstein piece,
yeah,
you mean?
because Eugene writes a lot with personae who are sometimes related to historical names or figures, but here we have very concrete individuals and a concrete episode. And I'm wondering if this is the first time you're doing that, and how it changes the task.
And I have literary figures.
But they
Marvel.
don't usually appear in the sort of the same context. Like when you have Marvel, he's meeting DJ Spinoza and so forth, and it's like a.
But I have.
And they don't seem to be so linked to their original biographies in this direct way where you had this episode. Or is it
I
not?
mean, this was a commission. But what's really curious is that when I started working on this, and I forgot to say that another part of the commission was to use, she asked me to use things that Wittgenstein says about private language in the philosophical investigation. This is Ludwig the Younger. So I was reading that, and I was reading, what's his name, Kripke and Wittgenstein. And then, you know, after doing all this preparation, you know, and not figuring out where to start, and I'm walking around and I start with Harms. There was a redheaded, you know, and so Paul Wittgenstein kind of turns into Harms, right, or into this kind of Harmsian character, because he lost his arm in Russia. I mean, the concentration camp was a POW camp in World War I. And then weirdly enough, and I think this was Lucia's request, so he turns into this Harmsian figure, but Ravel, you know, at this point is already coming down. I don't know if you can come down with aphasia, but he's coming down with aphasia, right? I mean, he's going through all these. It's not clear when the aphasia basically starts. It's some really weird kind, but he is in a really nasty cab accident right at this time. And in some strange way, Wittgenstein drifts into Harms, and Ravel's loss of memory, because one of the things is that it started with his loss of control over his writing. So he couldn't read his hand. He couldn't read his handwriting, right? And he lost control over words. And that's also completely Harmsian, right? So they both become these weird Harmsian figures. And so at the end, I'm just like, was this historical? You know?
Well, let's thank both of our poets. And please have some food and buy some books.
Yeah, hang on, sorry. Just 1 second, there was something I need to.
I loved the eggplant.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, thanks.
I remember reading it and thinking how difficult it would be to pronounce in some earlier iteration.
Right.
And it was was a stunning performance.
Oh, really? Thanks.
Impressive. I can't imagine trying to say that.
Okay. We have time.
No, I understand. Like you see, you don't want to forget what you thought. Yeah.
Thank you.